The round trip to heaven. One of the more unsettling discoveries in the past half a century is that the universe is not locally real. In this context, real means that objects have definite properties independent of observation, and apple can be read even when no one is looking. Local means that objects can be influenced only by their surroundings and that any influence cannot travel faster than light. Investigations at the frontiers of quantum physics have found that these things cannot both be true. Instead, the evidence shows that objects are not influenced solely by their surroundings, and they may also lack definite properties prior to measurement. This is, of course, deeply contrary to our everyday experiences. As Albert Einstein once bemoaned to a friend, "Do you really believe the moon is not there when you are not looking at it?" To adapt a phrase from author Douglas Adams, the demise of local realism has made a lot of people very angry and has been widely regarded as a bad move. Blame for this achievement has been laid squarely on the shoulders of three physicists, John Clauser, Milan Aspect, and Anton Zeilinger. They equally split the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics for experiments with entangled photons, establishing the violation of Bell inequalities and pioneering quantum information science. Bell inequalities refers to the trailblazing work of physicist John Stuart Bell of Northern Ireland, who laid the foundations for the 2022 Physics Nobel in the early 1960s. Colleagues agreed that the trio had it coming, deserving this reckoning for overthrowing reality as we know it. It was long overdue, says Sandu Popescu, a quantum physicist at the University of Bristol in England. Without any doubt, the prize is well deserved. The experiments beginning with the earliest one of Clauser and continuing along show that this stuff isn't just philosophical, it's real and, like other real things, potentially useful, says Charles Bennett, an eminent quantum researcher at IBM. Each year I thought, oh, maybe this is the year, says David Kaiser, a physicist and historian at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In 2022 it really was. It was very emotional and very thrilling. The journey from fringe to favor was a long one. From about 1940 until as late as 1990, studies of so-called quantum foundations were often treated as philosophy at best and crackpottery at worst. Many scientific journals refused to publish papers on the topic, and academic positions indulging such investigations were nearly impossible to come by. In 1985, Popescu's advisor warned him against a PhD in the subject. He said, "Look, if you do that, you will have fun for 5 years, and then you will be jobless," Popescu says. Today, quantum information science is among the most vibrant subfields in all of physics. It links Einstein's general theory of relativity with quantum mechanics via the still mysterious behavior of black holes. It dictates the design and function of quantum sensors, which are increasingly being used to study everything from earthquakes to dark matter. And it clarifies the often confusing nature of quantum entanglement, a phenomenon that is pivotal to modern materials science and that lies at the heart of quantum computing. What even makes a quantum computer quantum? Nicole Junger-Halpern, a physicist at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, asks rhetorically. One of the most popular answers is entanglement, and the main reason why we understand entanglement is the grand work participated in by Bell and these Nobel Prize winners. Without that understanding of entanglement, we probably wouldn't be able to realize quantum computers. You know, Kant told us that we interpret the reality of our senses, and that we also conceive what we perceive, and that we were Christians and should abide to God, and then Hegel showed us that Jesus gives us a gift that we must find in ourselves and bring it to the workplace to please God. whose glory resonates with the good worker, and at the day of judgment the Holy Spirit will be your ticket to heaven. From this he said we get the bondsman, the Lord, and the individual, and those three mindsets are what create the workplace where the few live a life of luxury at the top off of the poor. Jung says in reference to the above that this is synonymous to slavery. The hypothesis isn't all bad if we take away the extremes and polarities and created a harmonious dynamic social system where education, opportunities and moderation that is fundamental to achieving world peace and tranquility, which if the God hypothesis has wisdom, the truth is found in inner and outer peace and harmony accompanied with unconditional love, wisdom, tolerance and compassion, and that as we march through life's path that it is with virtuosity and all the above that opens the floodgates of both grace and glory, and if we are godsends and are the way that our good God intended, or are God seeds and we are how our God gets to go to heaven and live a life as an infinite conscious energy that is made up of holographic or individual and free immortal spiritual beings, or souls that are at one with all and everything. Ourselves are just the story that our lives dictate and is an illusion. If we meditate or at physical death we drop the story and take off the headset and we rejoin awareness. The amplitude herdens process our locality, giving rise to time and space, giving us our reality, and the cosmic permutations are the shuffling of the cards so that reality exists. Incompleteness theory suggests that we never know the whole picture. There is always more to know or discover about reality. In life we are the donkey and surviving is the game. Geist is the carrot that we all chase, and the audience are those that watch the game of life from above, egging them on, so as everyone can complete their soul's journey from formlessness on through physical reality to return home with the fruits and the treasures of the material world, thus adding change to eternity that commenced with the attainment of our innate wisdom or one's higher consciousness, which is the integration of one's spirit and the flesh. That being the attainment of the individual soul or one's place or true path within the physical world, and that is with spiritual wisdom or enlightenment at the festival each night where each and every soul drinks from the grail or the higher self's wisdom, and the Christian king is healed from his sickness as Parsifal completes his tale, and the soul is self-actualized and the God seeds, or life and humanity, restore their faith in the true path, which is the path that leads back into eternity, and the God seeds awake and create heaven as the integrated souls or the Etherians return home, bringing with them all their fruits and treasures that add self-conscious thought and form to eternity, thus fulfilling God's true karmic destiny, that being to self-actualize reality, to fulfill the integrity of heaven, and everyone lives together within the palace on the infinite and eternal shores of heaven, bliss, eternal void, hellfire, or ice within eternal matter. Decorated permutations. Hold. Locality and structures are not in quantum but are in the amplitude hedrons, so they create locality and structures or space-time. Jesus said, through me you will get to go to heaven. The me is the I or the self. It is through the self that God self-actualizes heaven and completes its odyssey. God has a will because it is apparent that the universe with multiplicity on its cosmic and planetary evolution that is consciously evolving or progressing on its spiritual cosmic conscious supernal experiential journey, where God is a phenomenal conscious entity, as in it does things spontaneously, like the Wu Wei, without thinking, and humans are meta-conscious beings or aware of themselves and their actions. So God is transforming or evolving from a phenomenal conscious entity into a meta-conscious, or a self-aware entity, and this is self-actualized when Logos, the second part of the Trinity, was personified as Jesus Christ when he came down to the earth according to the Christians in their teachings of the New Testament. Self-organized conscious beings and non-organized beings in life are both conscious. The former are self-aware, or conscious of themselves, and the latter are just particle conscious objects that are made up of basic conscious, or rational particles. So in a nutshell, everything is governed by, or has an individual and an interconnected conscious unity with Geist and the whole, the latter from which everything has sprung, and the whole is greater than its parts. I am not a human being in the vastness of space and time. The vast universe and my self-image are projections of a greater or infinite consciousness that is inside of everyone and everything, feeding me with feelings and assumptions of which we mediate by projecting our realities in what can be likened to a virtual reality headset that is being shown to us through our senses, our feelings and our emotions, and that through us and our projections of reality that is nothing short of a testing ground or a simulation is how this super or greater self that is one with all of its selves and creation wakes up within the illusion, and it discovers itself and the meaning to life. So that this greater consciousness can achieve, discover and explore itself through its creative avenues to rise above its humanity and then return home as Ethereans. But why, one may ask? Because it can. And of course, ultimately, why not? It may explain, hypothesize or assume the reason or its supernal purpose, but if one breaks down the constraints of this reality and sees beyond evolution and the Big Bang, and goes beyond the bowl and into the sink, then one can see the bigger picture, and that it is that consciousness creates all and everything, and through its creation it procreates, and after its children have played their roles within the illusion of both the spirit and the flesh within the bowl, they return home to the light, beyond the light to the sink, as a holographic entity and an equal constituent of the whole. Source, or the ultimate consciousness, the creator of both the spirit and the flesh, adding form to eternity and the circle of life, and the cross combine and then form eternal matter, and Ulysses returns home from his odyssey upon discovering eternity is within his children, and thought and substance are manifested within the void, and as in all good myths or fairy tales, they create along with the population eternal matter, and then everybody lives happily ever after. In a nutshell, we are all aspects of God's mind as it creates a pathway to realize a spiritual paradise which is at the edge of reality as it realizes its supernal creative innate inner peak potential. As the spirit and the flesh merges to create substance and add form within eternity with the arrival of the Creator's supernal offspring. Soul leading, life as self-motion and intelligence. Jessica Moss has argued that the entire unity of the Phaedras is assured by the motif of soul leading. The discussion of rhetoric, for instance, features the orator leading the soul to some decision or course of action. Socrates' great myth illustrates this motif most clearly when the soul is depicted as a charioteer and its horses being led around a heavenly circuit. This is the occasion for the first appearance in Plato's dialogues of the prominent Platonic doctrine that life is motion. The soul being the principle, or source, of life is that which moves itself, as opposed to inanimate objects that require an external source of motion to move them. The view that life is self-motion and that the soul is a self-mover is used by Plato to guarantee the immortality of the soul, making this a novel argument for the soul's immortality not found in the Phaedo. Plato relies further on the view that the soul is a mind in order to explain how its motions are possible. Plato combines the view that the soul is a self-mover with the view that the soul is a mind in order to explain how the soul can move things in the first place, e.g., how it can move the body to which it is attached in life. Souls move things by means of their thoughts. Lysias speech, 230e, 235e. Phaedrus and Socrates walk through a stream and find a seat in the shade. Phaedra and Socrates both note how anyone would consider Socrates a foreigner in the countryside, and Socrates attributes this fault to his love of learning which trees in open country won't teach, while men in the town will. Socrates then proceeds to give Phaedra credit for leading him out of his native land, yet you seem to have discovered a drug for getting me out. A hungry animal can be driven by dangling a carrot or a bit of green stuff in front of it. Similarly, if you proffer me speeches bound in books, I don't doubt you can cart me all around Attica, and anywhere else you please. Phaedra then commences to repeat Lysias' speech. Beginning with, you understand, then, my situation. I've told you how good it would be for us in my opinion, if this worked out. The speech proceeds to explain all the reasons why it is better to give your favor to a non-lover rather than a true lover. Friendship with a non-lover, he says, demonstrates objectivity and prudence. It doesn't create gossip when you are seen together, it doesn't involve jealousy, and it allows for a much larger pool of possible partners. You will not be giving your favor to someone who is more sick than sound in the head and is not thinking straight, overcome by love. He explains that it is best to give your favor to one who can best return it, rather than one who needs it most. He concludes by stating that he thinks the speech is long enough, and the listener is welcome to ask any questions if something has been left out. Socrates, attempting to flatter Phaedra, responds that he is in ecstasy and that it is all Phaedra's doing. Socrates comments that as the speech seemed to make Phaedra radiant, he is sure that Phaedra understands these things better than he does himself, and that he cannot help follow Phaedra's lead into his backseat frenzy. Phaedra picks up on Socrates' subtle sarcasm and asks Socrates not to joke. Note 4. Socrates retorts that he is still in awe, and claims to be able to make an even better speech than Lysias on the same subject. Note 5. First speech of Socrates, 237a, 241d. When Phaedra begs to hear it, however, Socrates refuses to give the speech. Phaedra warns him that he is younger and stronger, and Socrates should take his meaning and stop playing hard to get. Finally, after Phaedra swears on the plane tree that he will never recite another speech for Socrates if Socrates refuses, Socrates, covering his head, consents. Socrates, rather than simply listing reasons as Lysias had done, begins by explaining that while all men desire beauty, some are in love and some are not. We are all ruled, he says, by two principles. One is our inborn desire for pleasure, and the other is our acquired judgment that pursues what is best. Following your judgment is being in your right mind, while following desire towards pleasure without reason is outrage, hubris. Following different desires leads to different things. One who follows his desire for food is a glutton, and so on. The desire to take pleasure in beauty, reinforced by the kindred beauty in human bodies, is called eros. Remarking that he is in the grip of something divine, and may soon be overtaken by the madness of the nymphs in this place, he goes on. The problem, he explains, is that one overcome with this desire will want to turn his boy into whatever is most pleasing to himself, rather than what is best for the boy. The boy's intellectual progress will be stifled, his physical condition will suffer, the lover will not wish the boy to mature and take a family, all because the lover is shaping him out of desire for pleasure rather than what is best. At some point, right-minded reason will take the place of the madness of love, and the lover's oaths and promises to his boy will be broken. Phaedra believes that one of the greatest goods given is the relationship between lover and boy. This relationship brings guidance and love into the boy's life. Because the boy has a lover as such a valuable role model, he is on his best behavior to not get caught in something shameful. To get caught in something shameful would be like letting down his lover, therefore the boy is consistently acting his best. The absence of shame makes room for a sense of pride to come in, pride from the wealthy feeling of impressing one's own lover. Impressing one's own lover brings more learning and guidance into the boy's life. The non-lover, he concludes, will do none of this, always ruled by judgment rather than desire for pleasure. Socrates, fearing that the nymphs will take complete control of him if he continues, states that he is going to leave before Phaedra makes him do something even worse. However, just before Socrates is about to leave, he is stopped by the familiar divine sign, his demon, which always occurs and only just before Socrates is about to do something he should not. A voice, from this very spot, forbids Socrates to leave before he makes atonement for some offense to the gods. Socrates then admits that he thought both of the preceding speeches were terrible, saying Lysias repeated itself numerous times, seemed uninterested in its subject, and seemed to be showing off. Socrates states that he is a seer. While he is not very good at it, he is good enough for his purposes, and he recognizes what his offense has been. If love is a god or something divine, as he and Phaedra both agree he is, he cannot be bad, as the previous speeches have portrayed him. Socrates, baring his head, vows to undergo a rite of purification as a follower of the Muses, and proceeds to give a speech praising the lover. The beginning of Phaedrus in one of the most important medieval manuscripts of Plato, Codex Clarkianus 39 in the Bodleian Library, copied in AD 895. Second speech of Socrates, 244a 257b. Madness, 244a 245c. Socrates begins by discussing madness. If madness is all bad, then the preceding speeches would have been correct, but in actuality, madness given as a gift of the gods provides us with some of the best things we have. There are, in fact, several kinds of divine madness, theomania, of which he cites 4 examples. From Apollo, the prophetic madness. From Dionysus, the initiatory or ritual madness. From the Muses, the poetic madness. From Aphrodite, erotic madness. As they must show that the madness of love is, indeed, sent by a god to benefit the lover and beloved in order to disprove the preceding speeches, Socrates embarks on a proof of the divine origin of this 4th sort of madness. It is a proof, he says, that will convince the wise if not the clever. The soul, 245c 249d. He begins by briefly proving the immortality of the soul. A soul is always in motion and as a self-mover has no beginning. A self-mover is itself the source of everything else that moves. So, by the same token, it cannot be destroyed. Bodily objects moved from the outside have no soul, while those that move from within have a soul. Moving from within, all souls are self-movers, and hence their immortality is necessary. Then begins the famous chariot allegory. A soul, says Socrates, is like the natural union of a team of winged horses and their charioteer. While the gods have 2 good horses, everyone else has a mixture. One is beautiful and good, while the other is neither. As souls are immortal, those lacking bodies patrol all of heaven so long as their wings are in perfect condition. When a soul sheds its wings, it comes to earth and takes on an earthly body that then seems to move itself. These wings lift up heavy things to where the gods dwell and are nourished and grow in the presence of the wisdom, goodness, and beauty of the divine. However, foulness and ugliness make the wings shrink and disappear. In heaven, he explains, there is a procession led by Zeus, who looks after everything and puts things in order. All the gods, except for Hestia, follow Zeus in this procession. While the chariots of the gods are balanced and easier to control, other charioteers must struggle with their bad horse, which will drag them down to earth if it has not been properly trained. As the procession works its way upward, it eventually makes it up to the high ridge of heaven where the gods take their stands and are taken in a circular motion to gaze at all that is beyond heaven. What is outside of heaven, says Socrates, is quite difficult to describe, lacking color, shape, or solidity, as it is the subject of all true knowledge, visible only to intelligence. The gods delight in these things and are nourished. Feeling wonderful, they are taken around until they make a complete circle. On the way they are able to see justice, self-control, knowledge, and other things as they are in themselves, unchanging. When they have seen all things and feasted on them, coming all the way around, they sink back down inside heaven. The immortal souls that follow the gods most closely are able to just barely raise their chariots up to the rim and look out on reality. They see some things and miss others, having to deal with their horses. They rise and fall at varying times. Other souls, while straining to keep up, are unable to rise, and in noisy, sweaty discord they leave uninitiated, not having seen reality. Where they go after is then dependent on their own opinions, rather than the truth. Any soul that catches sight of any true thing is granted another circuit where it can see more. Eventually, all souls fall back to earth. Those that have been initiated are put into varying human incarnations, depending on how much they have seen. Those made into philosophers and artists have seen the most, while kings, statesmen, doctors, prophets, poets, manual laborers, sophists, and tyrants follow respectively. Souls then begin cycles of reincarnation. It generally takes 10,000 years for a soul to grow its wings and return to where it came, but philosophers, after having chosen such a life 3 times in a row, grow their wings and return after only 3,000 years. This is because they have seen the most and always keep its memory as close as possible, and philosophers maintain the highest level of initiation. They ignore human concerns and are drawn towards the divine. While ordinary people rebuke them for this, they are unaware that the lover of wisdom is possessed by a god. This is the 4th sort of madness, that of love. The madness of love, 249d, 257b. One comes to manifest this sort of love after seeing beauty here on earth and being reminded of true beauty as it was seen beyond heaven. When reminded, the wings begin to grow back, but as they are not yet able to rise, the afflicted gaze aloft and pay no attention to what goes on below, bringing on the charge of madness. This is the best form that possession by a god can take, for all those connected to it. When one is reminded of true beauty by the sight of a beautiful boy, he is called a lover. While all have seen reality, as they must have to be human, not all are so easily reminded of it. Those that can remember are startled when they see a reminder, and are overcome with the memory of beauty. Beauty, he states, was among the most radiant things to see beyond heaven, and on earth it sparkles through vision, the clearest of our senses. Some have not been recently initiated, and mistake this reminder for beauty itself and only pursue desires of the flesh. This pursuit of pleasure, then, even when manifested in the love of beautiful bodies, is not divine madness, but rather just having lost one's head. The recent initiates, on the other hand, are overcome when they see a bodily form that has captured true beauty well, and their wings begin to grow. When this soul looks upon the beautiful boy, it experiences the utmost joy. When separated from the boy, intense pain and longing occur, and the wings begin to harden. Caught between these two feelings, the lover is in utmost anguish, with the boy the only doctor for the pain. Socrates then returns to the myth of the chariot. The charioteer is filled with warmth and desire as he gazes into the eyes of the one he loves. The good horse is controlled by its sense of shame, but the bad horse, overcome with desire, does everything it can to go up to the boy and suggest to it the pleasures of sex. The bad horse eventually wears out its charioteer and partner, and drags them towards the boy, yet when the charioteer looks into the boy's face, his memory is carried back to the sight of the forms of beauty and self-control he had with the gods, and pulls back violently on the reins. As this occurs over and over, the bad horse eventually becomes obedient and finally dies of fright when seeing the boy's face, allowing the lover's soul to follow the boy in reverence and awe. The lover now pursues the boy. As he gets closer to his quarry, and the love is reciprocated, the opportunity for sexual contact again presents itself. If the lover and beloved surpass this desire, they have won the true Olympic contests. It is the perfect combination of human self-control and divine madness, and after death, their souls return to heaven. Those who give in do not become weightless, but they are spared any punishment after their death, and will eventually grow wings together when the time comes. A lover's friendship is divine, Socrates concludes, while that of a non-lover offers only cheap, human dividends, and tosses the soul about on earth for 9,000 years. He apologizes to the gods for the previous speeches, and Phaedra joins him in the prayer. Interpretations and themes. Chariot allegory. Plato paints the picture of a charioteer driving a chariot pulled by two winged horses. First, the charioteer of the human soul drives a pair, and secondly, one of the horses is noble and of noble breed, but the other quite the opposite in breed and character. Therefore, in our case, the driving is necessarily difficult and troublesome. The charioteer represents intellect, reason, or the part of the soul that must guide the soul to truth. One horse represents rational or moral impulse or the positive part of passionate nature, e.g., righteous indignation, while the other represents the soul's irrational passions, appetites, or concupiscent nature. The charioteer directs the entire chariot or the soul, trying to stop the horses from going different ways, and to proceed towards enlightenment. Plato describes a great circuit which souls make as they follow the gods in the path of enlightenment. Those few souls which are fully enlightened are able to see the world of the forms in all its glory. Some souls have difficulty controlling the black horse, even with the help of the white horse. They may bob up into the world of the forms, but at other times enlightenment is hidden from them. If overcome by the black horse or forgetfulness, the soul loses its wings and is pulled down to earth. Should that happen, the soul is incarnated into one of 9 kinds of person, according to how much truth it beheld. In order of decreasing levels of truth seen, the categories are: 1. Philosophers, lovers of beauty, or someone musical and erotic. 2. Law-abiding kings or civic leaders. 3. Politicians, estate managers, or businessmen. 4. Ones who specialize in bodily health. 5. Prophets or mystery cult participants. 6. Poets or imitative artists. 7. Craftsmen or farmers. 8. Sophists or demagogues. And 9. Tyrants. One need not suppose that Plato intended this as a literal discussion of metempsychosis or reincarnation. Perhaps he meant it figuratively. Plato does not see the human soul as a sort of patchwork of emotions and concepts. This differs from the views of many philosophers of his time. Instead, he views the soul as a sort of composite, in which many different elements blend together and affect each other. He uses the allegory of the charioteer to explain that love is a reflection of love of the forms, and is thus a divine madness, a theomania. Madness and divine inspiration. In the Phaedra, Socrates makes the rather bold claim that some of life's greatest blessings flow from madness, and he clarifies this later by noting that he is referring specifically to madness inspired by the gods. Phaedra is Plato's only dialogue that shows Socrates outside the city of Athens, out in the country. It was believed that spirits and nymphs inhabited the country, and Socrates specifically points this out after the long palinode with his comment about listening to the cicadas. After originally remarking that landscapes and trees have nothing to teach me, only people do, Socrates goes on to make constant remarks concerning the presence and action of the gods in general, nature gods such as Pan and the nymphs, and the muses, in addition to the unusually explicit characterization of his own demon. The importance of divine inspiration is demonstrated in its connection with the importance of religion, poetry and art, and above all else, love. Eros, much like in the Symposium, is contrasted from mere desire of the pleasurable and given a higher, heavenly function. Unlike in the Ion, a dialogue dealing with madness and divine inspiration in poetry and literary criticism, madness here must go firmly hand in hand with reason, learning, and self-control in both love and art. This rather bold claim has puzzled readers and scholars of Plato's work for centuries because it clearly shows that Socrates saw genuine value in the irrational elements of human life. Despite many other dialogues that show him arguing that one should pursue beauty and that wisdom is the most beautiful thing of all. Pederasty. The pederastic relationships common to ancient Greek life are also at the fore of this dialogue. In addition to theme of love discussed in the speeches, seeming double entendres and sexual innuendo are abundant. We see the flirtation between Phaedra and Socrates. As Phaedra encourages Socrates to make his first speech, Phaedra makes a remark at noontime that Socrates should not leave as the heat has not passed, and it is, straight up, as they say, Socrates wishes to know what Phaedra is holding under his cloak, and so on. The relationships discussed in the speeches are explicitly pederastic. And yet, this is tempered in various ways. Role reversals between lover and beloved are constant, as they are in the Symposium. Socrates, ostensibly the lover, exhorts Phaedra to lead the way at various times, and the dialogue ends with Socrates and Phaedra leaving as friends, equals, rather than partaking in the lover-beloved relationship inherent in Greek pederasty. In the beginning, they sit themselves under a chaste tree, which is precisely what its name suggests, often known as monk's pepper. It was used by monks to decrease sexual urges and is believed to be an anti-aphrodisiac. Notably, Socrates sees the pederastic relationship as ideally devoid of sexual consummation. Rather than being used for sexual pleasure, the relationship is a form of divine madness, helping both lover and beloved to grow and reach the divine. Rhetoric, philosophy, and art. The Phaedrus also gives us much in the way of explaining how art should be practiced. The discussion of rhetoric, the proper practice of which is found to actually be philosophy, has many similarities with Socrates' role as a midwife of the soul in the Theaetetus. The dialectician, as described, is particularly resonant. To practice the art, one must have a grasp of the truth and a detailed understanding of the soul in order to properly persuade. Moreover, one must have an idea of what is good or bad for the soul and, as a result, know what the soul should be persuaded towards. To have mastered the tools of an art is not to have mastered the art itself, but only its preliminaries. This is much like the person who claims to have mastered harmony after learning the highest and lowest notes of the lyre. To practice an art, one must know what that art is for and what it can help one achieve. The role of divine inspiration in philosophy must also be considered. The philosopher is struck with the fourth kind of madness, that of love, and it is this divine inspiration that leads him and his beloved towards the good, but only when tempered with self-control. Writing, examined separately but ultimately equated with philosophy and rhetoric, is somewhat deprecated. It is stated that writing can do little but remind those who already know. Unlike dialectic and rhetoric, writing cannot be tailored to specific situations or students. The writer does not have the luxury of examining his reader's soul in order to determine the proper way to persuade. When a tactic cannot defend itself, and is unable to answer questions or refute criticism. As such, the philosopher uses writing for the sake of amusing himself and other similar things rather than for teaching others. A writer, then, is only a philosopher when he can himself argue that his writing is of little worth, among other requirements. This final critique of writing with which the dialogue concludes seems to be one of the more interesting facets of the conversation for those who seek to interpret Plato in general. Plato, of course, comes down to us through his numerous written works, and philosophy today is concerned almost purely with the reading and writing of written texts. It seems proper to recall that Plato's ever-present protagonist and ideal man, Socrates, fits Plato's description of the dialectician perfectly, and never wrote a thing. Phaedra claims that to be a good speechmaker, one does not need to know the truth of what he is speaking on, but rather how to properly persuade, persuasion being the purpose of speech-making and oration. Socrates first objects that an orator who does not know bad from good will, in Phaedra's words, harvest a crop of really poor quality. Yet Socrates does not dismiss the art of speech-making. Rather, he says, it may be that even one who knew the truth could not produce conviction without knowing the art of persuasion. On the other hand, as the Spartan said, there is no genuine art of speaking without a grasp of the truth, and there never will be. To acquire the art of rhetoric, then, one must make systematic divisions between two different kinds of things. One sort, like iron and silver, suggests the same to all listeners. The other sort, such as good or justice, lead people in different directions. Lysias failed to make this distinction, and accordingly, failed to even define what love itself is in the beginning. The rest of his speech appears thrown together at random, and is, on the whole, very poorly constructed. Socrates then goes on to say, every speech must be put together like a living creature, with a body of its own. It must be neither without head nor without legs, and it must have a middle and extremities that are fitting both to one another and to the whole work. Socrates' speech, on the other hand, starts with a thesis and proceeds to make divisions accordingly, finding divine love, and setting it out as the greatest of goods. And yet, they agree, the art of making these divisions is dialectic, not rhetoric, and it must be seen what part of rhetoric may have been left out. When Socrates and Phaedra proceed to recount the various tools of speech-making as written down by the great orators of the past, starting with the preamble and the statement facts and concluding with the recapitulation, Socrates states that the fabric seems a little threadbare. He goes on to compare one with only knowledge of these tools to a doctor who knows how to raise and lower a body's temperature but does not know when it is good or bad to do so, stating that one who has simply read a book or came across some potions knows nothing of the art. One who knows how to compose the longest passages on trivial topics or the briefest passages on topics of great importance is similar. When he claims that to teach this is to impart the knowledge of composing tragedies. If one were to claim to have mastered harmony after learning the lowest and highest notes on the lyre, musician would say that this knowledge is what one must learn before one masters harmony, but it is not the knowledge of harmony itself. This, then, is what must be said to those who attempt to teach the art of rhetoric through preambles and recapitulations. They are ignorant of dialectic, and teach only what is necessary to learn as preliminaries. They go on to discuss what is good or bad in writing. Socrates tells a brief legend, critically commenting on the gift of writing from the Egyptian god Thoth to King Thamus, who was to disperse Thoth's gifts to the people of Egypt. After Thoth remarks on his discovery of writing as a remedy for the memory, Thamus responds that its true effects are likely to be the opposite. It is a remedy for reminding, not remembering, he says, with the appearance but not the reality of wisdom. Future generations will hear much without being properly taught, and will appear wise but not be so, making them difficult to get along with. No written instructions for an art can yield results clear or certain, Socrates states, but rather can only remind those that already know what writing is about. Furthermore, writings are silent, they cannot speak, answer questions, or come to their own defense. Accordingly, the legitimate sister of this is, in fact, dialectic. It is the living, breathing discourse of one who knows, of which the written word can only be called an image. The one who knows uses the art of dialectic rather than writing. The dialectician chooses a proper soul and plants and sows within it discourse accompanied by knowledge, discourse capable of helping itself as well as the man who planted it, which is not barren but produces a seed from which more discourse grows in the character of others. Such discourse makes the seed forever immortal and renders the man who has it happy as any human being can be. The philosopher king is a hypothetical ruler in whom political skill is combined with philosophical knowledge. The concept of a city-state ruled by philosophers is first explored in Plato's Republic, written around 375 BC. Plato argued that the ideal state, one which ensured the maximum possible happiness for all its citizens, could only be brought into being by a ruler possessed of absolute knowledge, obtained through philosophical study. From the Middle Ages onwards, Islamic and Jewish authors expanded on the theory, adapting it to suit their own conceptions of the perfect ruler. Several historical figures, including Alexander the Great and Marcus Aurelius, have been described by ancient and modern writers as embodying the philosopher-king ideal. In the Republic. The Republic is a Socratic dialogue. In the first two books, Socrates is challenged to give a definition of justice, which he proposes to accomplish by imagining how an ideal city-state would function. He suggests that the ideal state would be ruled over by a specially trained guardian class, in whom a spirited nature would be combined with a philosophic disposition. Socrates goes on to discuss various aspects of life within the state. In the fifth book, Socrates' interlocutors ask him whether the state he is describing could ever exist in reality. He replies that this could only happen on one condition. Until philosophers are kings, or the kings and princes of this world have the spirit and power of philosophy. Cities will never have rest from their evils, no, nor the human race, as I believe, and then only will this our state have a possibility of life and behold the light of day. Socrates clarifies this comment by distinguishing between true and false philosophers. The true philosopher, or lover of wisdom, is one who loves the truth in each thing, as opposed to those who only love the things themselves. This is a reference to Plato's belief that all particular things are only shadows of eternal forms. Only the philosopher, therefore, is qualified to rule, as only the philosopher has knowledge of the absolute truth and is able to apply this knowledge for the good of the state. Socrates next outlines the qualities which the ideal philosopher must possess, including truthfulness, temperance, justice, and a good memory. It is observed, however, that this ideal is in sharp contrast to reality, as many philosophers are utter rogues, and the best of them are generally considered to be useless. Socrates explains the poor reputation of philosophers through the metaphor of the ship of state, in which he compares Athenian democracy to a group of mutinous sailors vying with one another for control of the helm of a ship. The sailors, having themselves no knowledge of the art of navigation, deny that this is a necessary qualification for a pilot, and heap abuse on anyone who does not help them to achieve their goals. Socrates then acknowledges that many philosophers are indeed corrupt, but attributes this to the fact that they are brought up in a corrupt society. Only in the ideal state will a philosopher be able to achieve his full potential, and be the savior of his country, as well as of himself. Having returned to the subject of the ideal state, Socrates elaborates on the way in which his guardians would be educated, in order to lead them to a full and total knowledge of the forms. This education will last 35 years, and prospective guardians must then spend a further 15 years occupying lesser offices, in order to gain experience of life. At the age of 50, they will be qualified to rule. As philosophers, however, they will have no desire to engage in politics, they will do so only from a sense of duty. Socrates concludes this portion of the dialogue by reaffirming that the ideal state is capable of being realized, but only if one or more philosophers were to somehow come to power in a city. He further suggests that if this were to happen, the quickest way for a philosopher king to bring the perfect state into existence would be to send away every inhabitant over the age of 10, so as to be able to bring up the younger generation in accordance with philosophic principles. History of interpretation. Aristotle, in his Politics, criticizes many aspects of Plato's political theory, and sets out his own ideas about how a perfect city should be governed. Rather than proposing, as Plato does, the establishment of a ruling class, Aristotle argues that all citizens should take an equal share in the administration of the city. However, in one passage, Book 3, ch. 13, Aristotle does write that if one or more people happen to be found who far excelled their fellow citizens in virtue, it would be against the natural order for such people to be subject to the rule of their inferiors, and they should therefore be made kings in their state for life. While Aristotle here comes close to endorsing the philosopher-king ideal, he does not expressly state that this virtuous leader should be skilled in philosophy, and his writings more usually draw a sharp distinction between the theoretical wisdom of a philosopher and the political wisdom of a ruler. When the Politics was translated into Latin in the 13th century, it became the foundational text for political philosophy in the Christian world, and Plato's ideas were marginalized in favor of an Aristotelian separation of temporal and spiritual authority. Islamic scholars, on the other hand, were heavily influenced by Plato's Republic, finding in the philosopher-king a counterpart to the traditional figure of the Lawgiver prophet. Al-Farabi, for example, followed Plato closely, writing that the ideal state was that which most carefully attended to the spiritual education of its citizens, and that its ruler must therefore have a highly developed understanding of the purpose of human existence. Where Al-Farabi departed from Plato was in asserting that the founder of the perfect state must not only be a philosopher but also a prophet, as the perfect law could only come from God. The founder's successors need not be prophets, but they must still be philosophers, able to correctly interpret and apply the received law. Medieval Islamic philosophers had many opportunities to put their political theories into practice, as they often held positions in the royal court, with many even serving as viziers. Despite their belief in the philosopher-king ideal, no Islamic philosophers are known to have attempted to seize power for themselves, apparently being contented with a subservient position. Al-Farabi makes a concession to this state of affairs when he writes that, since rulers possessed of all the necessary virtues are rare, it is possible for the kingship of the ideal state to be shared between two people, one of whom is a philosopher and the other fulfills the remaining conditions. The translation into Hebrew of the works of Al-Farabi and Averroes saw the concept of the philosopher-king enter into Jewish political thought. Biblical figures such as Moses, Abraham, and Solomon were held up as examples of ideal rulers, with Plato's theory undergoing further distortions in order to meet the needs of Jewish philosophers. The popularity of the idea finally declined during the 17th century, as influential authors such as Baruch Spinoza began to formulate more secular political philosophies modeled on the works of Machiavelli. Real-world examples: Dionysius and Dion. It appears from the Republic that Plato did not think it impossible for his ideal state to be established in reality, and he did make one notable attempt to educate a ruler in the principles of philosophy. In 367 BC, Dionysius too came to power in Syracuse, Sicily, under the supervision of his uncle Dion, who was a friend and disciple of Plato. Dion invited Plato to Syracuse to serve as an advisor to Dionysius, and Plato accepted. However, he probably hoped for nothing more than to exercise a moderating influence on the tyrant. He is unlikely to have believed that he could transform Dionysius into a true philosopher king. In the event, Dionysius proved an unwilling student, and nothing came of the endeavor. Later, Dion attempted to seize power for himself, and was ultimately assassinated. In his possibly spurious seventh letter, Plato regretted Dion's death, and wrote that, if he had got the supreme power, he would then, by every means in his power, have ordered aright the lives of his fellow citizens by suitable and excellent laws, and the thing next in order, which he would have set his heart to accomplish, was to found again all the states of Sicily and make them free from the barbarians. If these things had been accomplished by a man who was just and brave and temperate and a philosopher, the same belief with regard to virtue would have been established among the majority which, if Dionysios had been won over, would have been established, I might almost say, among all mankind, and would have given them salvation. Other examples. Many other historical figures have been put forward as potential examples of philosopher kings. According to W. K. C. Guthrie and others, Plato's friend Archytas may have been the original inspiration behind the concept. Not only was Archytas a distinguished Pythagorean philosopher, he was also a skilled military general and a popular political leader, serving 7 terms as strategos in the city of Tarentum, Italy. Alexander the Great, as a student of Aristotle, has often been described as a philosopher king. His contemporary Onesicritus spoke of him as a philosopher in arms, and the 1st century Platonist Plutarch wrote in laudatory terms of his wisdom, generosity, temperance, and courage. Plutarch's justification for calling Alexander a philosopher was that he had actualized principles which had previously only been spoken of as ideals and had changed the brutish customs of countless nations. However, Alexander remains a controversial figure, as various historians have portrayed him very differently even into the modern day. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius is also frequently cited as a fulfillment of the philosopher-king ideal. Ancient sources such as the Historia Augusta call him the philosopher and praise him for the clemency of his reign, while his Stoic tome Meditations is still revered as a literary monument to a philosophy of service and duty. Galileo wanted a new language for science and philosophy. So because he found it difficult to describe qualities, because he believed that they were in one's head and not in reality, and that the world was full of things that one can measure, so he decided to describe the world in quantities, and mathematics were apt in this newfound scientific language. And that is why when a tree falls in a forest it doesn't make a sound, because no one was there to witness it fall, and because sound is a quality and they are in people's heads, because no one was there are no qualities, so when it fell it made no sound at all. So consciousness was deemed as outside philosophy. Consciousness means inner experience of one's senses, and it is a mystery on how it can fall into a scientific worldview. How can they describe the taste or smell so consciousness cannot be explained, as it's a quality not quantity, and it's a mystery. We know that you're in pain or happy, but science can't explain it, so they postulate what they can't see to explain things that we can see, but with consciousness you can't see it, so it falls short of an explanation, so they rely on language to explain consciousness. So they measure conscious experiences, but it can't be experimented on to explain it. It explained why we are having the experiences, so science handed consciousness over to philosophy to divide the why we produce consciousness, and it got called materialism or physicalism. So they looked at a physical system. To explain consciousness, how do you explain taste, color, smell, etc.? So Galileo put consciousness outside of mathematics. But how do they bring it back into scientific explanation, as it couldn't be described with its quantities, so even though we can sense things we cannot explain its qualities. So it's not real in the purely quantity state of philosophic science, as you can't describe the color blue to a blind person with quantities. It was all an illusion, and it's not real. So basically, because they couldn't describe the taste of chocolate, they said that it was an illusion. The amplitude-hadron particle, which is an abstract interdimensional particle that from the act of observation of the particles scattering in a particle accelerator when the atoms are smashed is said is the catalyst for the creation of the subatomic particles and the superstrings, which in turn manifest our atomic reality, and a cosmological polytope does the same. Further, because of the findings of and the repercussions of the observation of the amplitude hydroparticles and the like, the scientists and mathematicians agree that the locality and the epistemic universe comes into fruition initially from the above-mentioned abstract interdimensional particles interaction within the scattering process. They have now theorized that at 10 to the power of minus 33 in 1 cubic centromere and 10 to the power of minus 33 within a second is outside our space-time continuum. And they say that there are conscious dynamic entities that dwell there, and they could be our creators. Which for me connects to the ancient Greek gods, which govern and observe us on our spiritual odysseys as we finalize our reality trip with a virtuous world mindset, with the philosopher king at the helm navigating our souls into love consciousness into eternity to forge spiritual utopia or eternal matter that is ever expanding with the arrival of every new soul as we become individual and one free immortal spirits as one with all and everything. And we complete our round trip to heaven in our cosmic spiritual divine journey that brings together both the spirit and the flesh to adorn eternity with the fruits and pleasures of the Etherean's odyssey.